Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, or expert seminar, we tend to call it. Thank you very much for coming today. Welcome, Anna. So if you can introduce yourself and teach us about the sensory development.
Thank you, Arthur. So I'll just give you a bit of background about myself. This is my first webinar for the London School of Childcare Studies. I've very recently done the sleep practitioner course with you as well, which is how I got to know you. Like I said, my name's Anna. I am a children's occupational therapist. I have been a children's OT for about 10 years now, and mostly my background is working in various NHS roles in the Northwest. I am also in the process of setting up to do some independent work. And as an OT, what I'm looking at is to support the development of a child or a young person's functional skills, to support their participation and to support the development of independent skills. So I work with children from birth right up to the age of 18, so normally while the child or young person is still in education. And as an OT, I work a lot with children who have sensory processing difficulties or sensory processing differences. And for about 5 years now, I've been running sensory training on and off, really, as part of my NHS role. Now, normally the sensory training that I do is around sensory processing differences or sensory processing difficulties. Now, that's not going to be the focus of today's session. I know there's often lots of questions about that. What we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be looking at sensory development in infants in terms of typical development, and then how we can enhance that through play-based activities. And I think the only other thing to say really is that I'm also a mum. I have a 13-month-old, so I've got a lot of very recent experience of implementing a lot of these play-based activities. So almost all of them have been tried and tested by me quite recently. There we go. So I've put some learning objectives down. So by the end of the session, I'd like everyone to be able to take away an understanding of what sensory processing is and why it is important for child development. So some people may have done some sensory training in the past, and hopefully it'll be a good refresher and maybe build on it in relation to child development. For others, it might be the first time you're hearing about sensory processing. There is a lot of information out there about sensory processing, but what I've tried to do, I've tried to put as much information on the slide so you can take them away and come back and look at them again. Secondly, I want everyone to be able to understand what the main senses are and have an idea about when and how they develop in infants. And lastly, understanding practical sensory ideas for infants, sensory play-based ideas that can help support early development. And we're going to be looking really at that 0 to 12, 13-month age range, but some of the ideas will be suitable for toddlers as well. And obviously remembering that all children develop at different rates. So actually you may be working with a slightly older child and some of these sensory ideas are suitable for them as well. Okay. So just a little interactive activity, really. I already know everyone's there on the chat, but can anybody name any of the 8 senses? So just pop it in the chat box. We've got 5 senses that we often learn about at school and that most people know. And then there are 3 lesser known hidden senses. So bonus points if you get any of those.
So we've got from Anthony Balance. We've got from Jackson touch, sight, taste, spatial awareness.
Yes.
Vestibular, taste, touch, sight, seeing, hearing, feeling, touch.
Yeah. Fab. So I think we mentioned most of them there. So we definitely mentioned hearing, sight, touch, taste, and then vestibular was also mentioned. The others that I think we touched on are when someone mentioned spatial awareness, so proprioception, which is body awareness, and another one that people often haven't heard of is interoception, and that is an awareness of what's going on inside of our bodies. So I'm going to come back to all these senses in a moment. We're going to talk through them all individually, really, but we have at least these 8 sensory systems. and they are constantly sending sensory information to our brain via nerve impulses to let us know that something is happening either in our body or within our wider environment. And so what is sensory processing? Well, it is a neurological process during which sensory information from our body and environment is processed, integrated and organised. Now, to break that down a little bit, so by a neurological process, we mean something that's happening in our central nervous system and our brain, during which that sensory information from each of the 8 senses is received, processed, integrated with information from the other senses. The brain then organises that information, and if there's no problems with sensory processing, then we're able to produce an adaptive response to respond to whatever that sensory input was in our environment. And that helps us keep ourselves safe and do all the things we want and need to do. So it is essential really to everything that we want to do on a day-to-day basis, from eating, getting dressed, engaging in play, for you sitting here right now to be able to hear what I'm saying, to be able to watch the presentation on the screen, to be able to keep yourself sitting still and focused, and to be able to concentrate and attend to this session. So it really is important for everything that we want or need to do on a day-to-day basis. Now, it's also something that happens in all of us all of the time. So it's continuous in all of us. And we're often not consciously aware of every bit of sensory information that we're processing. But our sensory systems begin to develop while baby is in the womb, so in the prenatal period. And we all, as babies, first make sense of the world using our senses. But we're not born with them fully integrated, so we're not born with them working together. And there's a rapid period during the first 7 years of life, really, where our senses become fully integrated and begin to work together to help us to make sense of our environment and our bodies. For most children, sensory integration, and just to say as well, probably should have said it at the start of the slide, sensory processing and sensory integration ultimately mean the same thing. So they're 2 terms that are used interchangeably, I think, depending on where in the world you are and what type of background you've got. But ultimately, when I'm saying sensory processing or sensory integration, those 2 terms mean the same. So the development to sensory integration occurs through normal interactions with our environment and normal, typical childhood experiences. So things like play, engaging with caregivers, engaging in your environment, typical milestones, so opportunities to learn to roll, for tummy time, to sit, to crawl, to walk. This is how our sensory integration develops. But for some children, it's less well developed, and they may experience sensory processing difficulties, which can impact on development. It's not always because there's a lack of opportunity. It's usually because there's something going wrong in that process of sensory processing. Now, I'm not going to go into any more detail really, other than I had a little look at a couple of recent papers and research articles, and the prevalence of sensory processing differences is sort of 1 in 6 to 1 in 10 people. So it's really quite common. And it's not just about having maybe a little quirk or a sensory preference. It's more when sensory input or sensory processing is impacting on what we want or need to do. And ultimately, sensory processing is a foundational skill for development and higher learning. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on this slide, but I like using this visual. So this is the Pyramid of Learning by Williams and Schellenberger. There's a couple of variations of it out there online, so you may or may not have seen it before. And I use it to really depict the importance of our senses in the development of higher level skills and learning. So you can see at the bottom there, just above where it says central nervous system, so on the outline, the bottom 2 rows are the senses. And if you imagine a pyramid, if there was an issue with the base of the pyramid, if there was a crack, if there was part of a block missing, there's going to be issues higher up. So ultimately, we need good sensory processing to then be able to go on and develop things like motor planning, postural security, a good body scheme, so an awareness of our body, hand-eye coordination, attention and concentration, language skills, and then you can see moving up that pyramid onto behaviour, daily living activities, so back to the things we want and need to do, like getting dressed, and then finally academic learning. So it very much, for our sensory processing, very much forms the foundations for all those higher level skills. Okay, so we'll go through the senses. Like I say, there's a lot of information here, so most of it is on the slides. But proprioception is a really big, really important sense that a lot of people have not heard of before. They might not hear of it until you come and do some training like this. But it gives us an awareness of where our body is in space, and it allows us to gauge the pressure and force that's needed in our actions. So we have proprioceptive receptors. So by receptors, that means the way that we perceive and receive that particular type of sensory input. And these are in our muscles, tendons, ligaments, and joints. So we get proprioceptive feedback when we move our bodies against resistance. So things like pulling, pushing, crashing play, chewing, deep pressure, so like a big hug or massage, will all stimulate our proprioceptive system. And our proprioceptive system really overloads our nervous system, so it's generally calming and regulating input. Unlike the other senses, which can quite overload us, proprioception is normally quite a calming sense. It's not the development of proprioception, I don't think, has been fully mapped, but we know that deep pressure touch begins to develop and is first experienced when baby's in the womb. It's obviously a very tight, enclosed space, so we're getting lots of deep pressure feedback. And it's important for things like postural stability, coordination, self-regulation, so that ability to calm and regulate ourselves. Now, obviously, babies and young children are very much dependent on an adult or caregiver for regulation, but we're wanting to move towards, as the child gets older, to be able to regulate themselves and their responses to sensory input in their environments. And proprioception is a really good way of helping children and young people to do that. And it helps babies understand where their body parts are in relation to each other without vision. So without using the other senses, they'll know, actually, my arm is here, you know, I've got an itch, I want to touch my nose, and they can do that without turning their head to look. And it's really important then for the development of motor coordination skills. And that's proprioception in a bit of a nutshell, really. There's obviously a lot more information out there, but it's closely linked. Tactile sense, because you're always going to get some tactile feedback when you get proprioceptive feedback, and our tactile sense is the first sense that develops from 7 weeks gestation, so very, very early on, and it allows us to feel light touch, deep pressure, texture, temperature, vibration, and pain. And the way we receive tactile feedback is through touch on our skin, which is obviously all over our body, and then the lining inside our mouth. And we've got the most tactile receptors in our hands and face and around our mouth. So babies first, you will see a baby first begin to explore the world by bringing everything to their mouth. Everything goes to the mouth. And that's partly because they get lots of sensory feedback from this area. And studies have shown that babies prefer touch, so tactile feedback, comfort, to mum's voice. So it is a really early way of providing comfort and support to a baby. It's also Studies show it's critical to early emotional and social attachment, and regular touch and massage have been found to improve things like sleep, weight gain, alertness, and reduce stress in babies. So again, it links very closely with the proprioceptive system, and then ultimately, as children grow, is important for fine and gross motor skill development. We need to be able to feel and understand what we're feeling in our environment to develop those higher level motor skills. So that's our tactile sense. Our vestibular sense, another big one, provides us with a sense of movement and balance. So I won't go too much into the science behind it, but we perceive vestibular, so movement-based feedback, through two types of receptors that are in our inner ear. So when we move our head, we get lots of feedback, movement-based feedback about where our body is, what movements we're feeling, our balance. And those receptors are developed at 5 months gestation, but our vestibular sense continuously develops and only reaches maturity at adolescence. So it's one, if you watch young children, their balance isn't very good. They've got to develop that skill. When they begin walking, sitting, the balance again, they often need a bit of support until that develops further, and that continues to develop right through to adolescence. We all first experience vestibular input, movement-based input, when we're in the womb. The baby moves around, mum moves around, and we get lots of movement-based vestibular feedback. And again, very important for motor skill development, muscle tone, head control, hand-eye coordination, and language skill development. So another really big sense. And I won't flick back to the pyramid, but when you get the slides, you can see the three senses at the very bottom were our tactile, vestibular, and proprioceptive senses. And that's because they're really, really important for the development of everything above it, including the other senses that a lot of us know about, but we often don't know about these other really big, really important senses. And the last sort of head, because the proprioceptive, vestibular, and interoceptive senses, if you've not heard about them before, it's a lot of big words and a lot of information. So the last one of these is our sense of interoception. Now, there's still not a lot known about this sense. It's an emerging area, really. There's more research, there's more information known, but we still don't know everything. I get a lot of my information about this sense. I think she's an American OT called Kelly Mailer. All her work is about interoception. She's got a really good website, and that's where I go to get information if you're interested about interoception. But ultimately, what it is an awareness of what is going on inside of our bodies. So it allows us to know things like if we're full, hungry, thirsty, tired, hot or cold, in pain, when we need to go to the bathroom, when we need to go to the toilet. And to be able to understand all those things, which obviously young babies don't do straight away. We don't expect them to be able to do that straight away. But if we don't begin to develop this skill and understand what's happening inside our bodies, it will impact on things like our self-regulation, because obviously we may be able to feel something is wrong, but we don't necessarily know what that is in order to be able to address it. So we receive that feedback through our internal organs, like our stomach and our bladder and our bowels. So it really is just one to be aware of, really. I just like people to know about this sense. But there is a bit more information out there if you are interested online. And I would recommend the OT, Kelly Mailer. There's a lot on her website.
We talk about interoception in our starting solids as well, because we have that tendency kind of, not force, but kind of encourage children to eat. And what Lucy's saying, we need to let our children to tell us when they're done, rather than trying, playing and all that kind of thing, because they will lose that awareness when they fall, because they want to please us. So that's something I learned about interoception in our starting solid course.
For most children, their interoceptive sense will develop without any problems. It's only, there might be the odd child that's not able to tell us those things, but most babies know when they're full, and will go for more food. So it's a really good one to be aware of, because I don't think, unless you've done some training like this or you've done the feeding training, it often doesn't come up.
Yeah, it's very common in my culture, where I come from, Eastern Europe, that we tend to kind of try to fill the baby as much as possible because we want them to be full and trying to play all kind of different games. But it's not really helpful if we want them to have this sense of interoception developed.
No, I have that panic as a mum as well if my little one's not eating, even though I know I think it's just natural to want to feed them.
I know.
So the rest of the senses that we'll go through, I think people will mostly have probably heard of before, so it's not quite as heavy, not as much information. But our visual sense, our sense of sight, is the least developed sense at birth. So I think if you're working with a young baby in particular, this is a good thing to understand. So our peripheral vision, so our vision at the sides of our eyes, is more developed than our central vision at birth. And a newborn initially sees and focuses best on objects that are sort of 20 to 30 centimetres away and high contrast. So I do have a couple here, like black and white images. But high contrast doesn't mean it has to be black and white. Bit of red, yellow as well will help a baby be able to focus on those. And there are a series of developments that happen after that until sort of we get to about 10 months, when a baby's vision is good enough to grasp objects with a finger and thumb. So it's one to consider where you position yourself in terms of play with a baby. There's no point with a newborn and being on the other side of the room and trying to get them to look at you because you're just too far away. So just to be aware of how the sense of vision develops and could impact on play, and you need to consider that really in how you're positioning yourself and how you're positioning their toys. And it's important for hands-eye coordination, spatial awareness, depth perception, and also provide the foundations for social development. So being able to see caregivers' faces, mum's face, dad's face, to be able to see what's going on in their environment and begin to understand expressions is all really important for later social development. And then our sense of hearing, so our auditory sense, is fully developed normally at birth, so by 28 weeks gestation, and newborns know their mum's voice at birth. When babies are in the womb, it's not a quiet space, so they're hearing mum's heartbeat. I think it's like a loud whooshing noise. So it's a bit of a myth, really, that babies need quiet to sleep. Rather, rhythmical sounds like white noise are quite calming for babies, but loud, irregular, unexpected sounds can be alerting or distressing. So the blender, the hoover, can be quite a lot, and that it goes right up for toddlers as well. It doesn't just stop with babies. Those sounds can be quite alerting or distressing. And stimulating our auditory sense is essential for language development. To be able to hear what's going on is an essential foundation really for developing higher level language skills. Our sense of taste, or gustatory sense, is developed also by 28 weeks gestation. So babies are born with a full set of taste glands at birth. And evidence suggests that babies can taste sweet, bitter, savoury and sour flavours, but not salty flavours until about 4 months old. And it's linked very, very closely to our sense of smell. And when we talk about play in a moment, obviously babies, the recommendation is the babies aren't weaned until about 6 months old. So we wouldn't be doing any sort of taste-based play with a younger baby, but just some background really on how that sense develops there. So our sense of taste and smell are very, very closely linked. Our sense of smell is also developed by 28 weeks gestation and can be really, really overpowering at birth and for new babies. Babies can recognise their mum's smell at birth. And can use that to tell people apart before they can see them. And obviously, as that develops, they'll begin to recognise dad's smell and regular caregiver's smell. So remembering that babies can't see a big distance, but they will recognise smells. And our sense of smell is essential for comfort and closely linked to the brain's emotional and memory centres. So you've possibly all experienced, if you go somewhere or there's suddenly a smell that takes you back to a time maybe in your childhood or something that's happened, a good memory, and that's because it is so closely linked to our memory centres. We'll talk about sensory play. And sensory play is simply play that engages a child's senses. So babies first learn about themselves and the world around them through their senses, and new connections in their brain are made through sensory play, which supports their development. So when play experiences are repeated or built upon, these connections are strengthened. But if we don't experience that again, or they're not exposed to a similar type of activity again, connections can be lost or removed. So sensory play and ongoing sensory play is really important for development and strengthening those brain connections. We've talked through really why the senses are important, but it also supports language development, sensory play, as children learn to respond to different stimuli. And so we can obviously do sensory play that is stimulating maybe one sense at a time, but the other type of play is multi-sensory stimulation, so where we're engaging more than one sense. And this type of play has been shown to enhance the processes for cognitive, emotional, and physical development. So with sensory play, there's loads of sensory toys out there, there's lots on the market, and some of them are really, really good, but you don't need to spend a lot of money to do engaging sensory play. And sensory play doesn't have to be super structured. It's not a structured type play. For very young babies, you might have to actually do a lot. So to introduce them to the sense while they're still learning about their body awareness and how to use their hands. But it doesn't need to be otherwise structured. You can sort of introduce them to an activity and let them explore that at their pace. And I always say with sensory play to model, provide encouragement, but never force a child to, say, touch some messy play that they're not sure about, or to play with a noisy toy if they're showing that they're not too sure about. I'd be doing things more like putting it there for them to explore on their own terms, or modelling it from a distance so they're beginning to see and engage with that type of play. So in terms of practical ideas for sensory play, I think a lot of you have got a childcare background, so you're probably quite familiar with a lot of these. And obviously very young babies, newborns, need a different type of support with play to an older baby who's maybe exploring things a little bit more independently. But a lot of the ideas I've put down on the slides can be graded and adapted as a baby grows and develops. So with younger babies, having access to different materials, so soft materials, I love a foil blanket, there's lots of different type of mats out there, textured mats. You don't need to go and buy them, see what's in the house. What I did before I had my little one, I went to a haberdashery, got some off the ends, like end of roll cuts, really, really cheaply. They were things they weren't going to sell otherwise. So I've got them all sort of here, lots of different ones here. And I just had a box that I could get out, lie baby on the floor, because ultimately babies are developing, children develop best on the floor, being able to explore. So could lie him on different materials. I used to line his bouncer with them so he could have a feel with his feet and his hands. You can move that on for older babies to sitting on it, doing some tummy time on different textures. As they start to pull to stand, standing on different textures so they can feel that with their feet, playing hide and seek. So ideally with something see-through and breathable over their head so they can feel it there too. So you can use the same materials right through those early years of play, just in different ways to give them lots of tactile feedback and build upon what they've already experienced. The other good thing for tactile play is getting outside wherever you can, really explore grass, leaves. If you live by a beach, get to the beach, sand, shells, just being outside, exploring nature, flowers, whatever is there really. Now, with messy play, it wouldn't be something I recommended until a child was feeding independently. But with younger babies, if you're wanting to explore them to different textures with food, you've got just a Ziploc bag, and you can fill that with whatever it is, they can have a feel hand over hand through a Ziploc bag. It's quite a good way to introduce children to that. It's also quite a good way if your child's a bit unsure of a new texture, to put it inside a Ziploc bag so they can begin to feel it without getting it on their hands. But taste safe, edible, messy play is quite a good way to explore new textures too. Jelly, spaghetti, water, oats. Because ultimately babies are probably going to bring most things to their mouth, so we need to make sure that it's taste safe, any messy play that we're doing. By a sensory snake, that's just if you've got some different fabrics, putting it on the floor in a snake shape so they can explore, especially when they're at that stage of crawling. Or if you're a good sewer, you can sort of put it inside material and do some tummy time over it so they can do tummy time on different textures. Foil's quite a good one for that because it gives a bit of noise as well as tactile feedback. And then with tactile, remember, that includes exploring with our mouth. So I've got a massive collection of teethers, and you can get different ones, wooden, or these ones that have got the bristles on the back. Allow children to explore toys with their mouth, obviously making sure they're safe to do that, no small toys. And then things like tummy time in different positions. I've put on a water mat here. You don't need to go and buy a water mat though, but it is one way of providing tummy time with some tactile input. And then with proprioceptive activities, so there's incorporating massage as part of a routine. Bedtime, nap time can be really good. Remembering that the proprioceptive sense will help to calm and regulate. As children it's good for younger babies too that can't do the more active, engaged play. But as your baby gets older, letting them do pushing and pulling activities with push toys, climbing. Again, it's one for older babies. To toddlers, soft play by a pickler. I mean, the wooden climbing frames that can be used indoors that fold away. So remember that pulling up and pushing is really good for proprioceptive feedback. Crawling through tunnels. You don't need to go out and buy a tunnel. You might be able to set something up in between two boxes or chairs. Getting them to go on weight bear through their hands and knees is also good for proprioceptive feedback. Chewing, and for older babies again, learning to blow bubbles. So using the muscles of our mouth will give lots of good proprioceptive regulating, calming feedback there. And proprioceptive activities are quite good if you've done something that's a little bit more alerting, and you can see baby getting a little bit giddy, a bit overexcited. Ending the activity with something that's a little bit calmer can be a quite good way to help regulate them again, especially if you're moving into nap time. By vestibular play ideas, we're ultimately wanting baby to be able to explore their body and move about. So firstly, for young babies, getting them on the floor, lots of opportunities to roll, to do tummy time, to move their head in different positions. Tummy time doesn't have to be done on the floor though, if baby's not sure of that. You can do tummy time on your chest, over your knee, over your arm. There's lots of different ways to introduce tummy time. And then rocking and swaying. For small babies, making sure their head is well supported is generally quite regulating. With vestibular play, anything that's up and down, or back and forth, is going to be quite regulating, calming. But we might not see it so much with young babies, but if children start to spin or hang upside down, that's much more alerting, overstimulating input. And it's input that children often need, but it's just one to keep your eye on, really. But for babies, bouncing on your knee, playing, singing row, row, row your boat, are all really good movement-based vestibular activities, just allowing them to explore their body and how things feel. Rough and tumble, it might be one you more leave to parents, but rough and tumble for babies within sort of what would be appropriate for them is really good. And one I would say, if you work in a nursery or a childcare setting, normally one of the toys that I recommend is a therapy ball, like a big yoga ball or peanut roll, which is like a peanut shaped ball, because there's so much that you can do with it. So bouncing on it, lying over it, Older children will often want to sit on them. You can also do some deep pressure, not so much for babies. I wouldn't be using a peanut roll to do deep pressure for babies, but for older children. So if you are in a nursery or a childcare setting and looking to put some more sensory input in place, peanut roll or a therapy ball is normally one that I would recommend. And then visual play ideas. So there's a lot on the slide there, but ultimately what we're looking for is for babies to be able to experience different visual input, light, dark, different shades of things from different perspectives. So babies love mirrors, so anything with a mirror in is quite good. For really young babies, so I've got a few, I think I showed you them just before, but things like this, the high contrast black and white, and then moving into more colour is quite good. A good place to put the cards is normally maybe by a changing mat. So babies can look at them if they're a bit distressed during changing, and get their engagement. You can get high contrast mobiles to hang above either changing mats or cots. I would normally say a changing mat rather than a cot, because you don't want to overstimulate them or keep them awake at nap time so much. Can be really good early activities to do. And then moving on to using a baby gym. So baby can lie on the mat and look up at everything above them. And then for older babies, picture books, puppets, exploring light up toys. A projector can be a really good one. And some of them are very expensive, but you can get them relatively inexpensive online. Exploring sensory bottles and containers. Now you can make some. I did make a few early on, but you can also buy some more like this type of thing for baby to play with, get lots of visual feedback through it. So noisy, auditory, play-based ideas. What we're wanting babies to do really is explore different sounds, different pitches, different tones, fast noises, slow noises, lively noises, and you can both do that either with things that are in the environment, like pasta being poured into a pan, running water, or obviously there's lots of noisy toys that are out there like rattles, bells, shakers. With very young babies, it may be shaking a rattle and getting them to turn their head to that noise. Whereas with older babies, maybe doing hand over hand with things like rattles and bells, so they can begin to make that noise themselves, and then show them, we can do this slowly, we can do this fast. How does it sound? Reading, I always reading together, changing your voice as you talk, using different pictures to show excitement or sadness in books. Rhymes with actions are all really good to get baby exposed to a range of auditory input. Noisy toys are fine too, but you don't need lots of noisy toys for this. It's very much things you can do with baby yourself. So the last few really, so with our sense of taste and smell, obviously babies will get a lot of that through feeding. It's one of the most sensory activities, feeding. But before then or outside of meal times, you can explore different scents for baby, either through, you can maybe fill up some spice pots, or actually let baby explore some fruits and vegetables. But things to be aware of really that more alerting scents are things like peppermint, citrus, cinnamon, but more calming scents are things like vanilla, rose and chamomile, something that smells like mum, particularly for younger babies, but for older babies, it could be something that smells like dad or grandma, granddad, as well, that familiar scent. And you can incorporate that into other things like bath time, massage. We get some oils that are scented, it can be quite good. And if you're going to incorporate it then, I'd be using more calmer scents, but very much just exploring different scents through play, and at different times of the day, like bath time and bedtime, is really good for development. So the last one is interoception. Now there's no specific, for this age group anyway, there's no specific activities I would recommend, rather that through play, begin to name body parts, talk about how their body feels to you. So if they're kicking their legs on you, saying things like, your legs feel strong today, you're kicking them lots. Or if they're a little bit grizzly or they're chewing a lot, you're grizzly today, I wonder how you're feeling. I wonder if your tummy's sore. I wonder if you're teething. I wonder if your teeth are sore. Those type of things over time will help baby to develop, well, firstly, their body awareness, so proprioception too, but also interoception, so how they're feeling inside of their bodies. And I think just a few other things to consider with babies. Babies are easily overstimulated, so don't go overboard with stimulation. You don't need to have lots of different types of activities out. You could pick one or two things to leave out for them to explore, or for you to introduce them to. Be careful of the more alerting activities. So we talked there about some scents that are more alerting, some movement things that are more alerting. Just be careful of when you're doing them, and make sure there's a bit of wind down time or calming input. And remember that young babies are reliant on carers, mum, dad, caregivers to regulate themselves. So reading their signals, getting to know the children that you're working with, because all the signals might not be the same. But when are they grizzly? Are they turning away? Are they showing signs of tiredness? And thinking, actually, now it's time to end this activity, move on to something else. And always, like I say, offer but don't force exposure to sensory-based play. So, any questions?
Yep. I don't see questions coming in. Thank you so much, but they will, hopefully. Yeah, that was very interesting. The interoception is really interesting subject, isn't it? Because it keeps popping up in sleep about neuroception we just talked about. I study now, I'm on a course with Dr. Shankar actually about emotion regulation. So interoception is big there. Yeah. And it's mainly about us carers, child carers and parents kind of being aware of what is happening inside us, so we can, be present and, make the children feel safe, because they can feel how we feel, don't they?
Not one that I've always incorporated in sensory training, but it's definitely one that we're more aware of. So it's a newer, parents come to me and say, what about interoception? Could this be something that's going on? So it's one I would say over the last few years that people are more and more aware of, but is as important as the other senses.
Yeah. We are actually planning a course on expert seminar on something like that with Alicia. She's a psychiatrist. She's going to be talking about our own emotion regulation when we're working with the children and trauma from our childhood, how that can impact. So it's going to be a really interesting session. So watch out, guys. I hope you sign up for our newsletter so you get invite. So here are the messages. Evelyn, brilliant session. How do I know my baby is overstimulated? Tired is obvious, but any ideas?
Yeah, so if they're either pulling away, if they're turning their head away, rubbing their eyes, they're getting grizzly, they're arching their back, any of that, especially for a young baby, any of those earlier signs, I just watch out for them. Every baby would show that probably slightly differently. As my baby's got older, his definite way of telling me he's had enough is to throw something. So older babies will throw, maybe if I've offered him something like this and he doesn't want it, he would throw it. And it may be just taking them out of that environment for a bit of calm down for a few minutes just to see, or putting something away and just offering something that's a little bit calmer. Depending on the age of your baby, you probably get a bit of a cue if you're working with things like wake windows or structured nap times, depending on as to where you are in that, as to whether or not it may be time for a change or time for something a bit calmer. But just watching out for any behaviours really. Are they blinking, rubbing their eyes, turning away, pushing things away? And as babies get older, it will become a little bit more obvious as to what it is that they're not quite so happy with.
It's interesting, isn't it, how they have their own temperament and kind of sensitivity, how each child is different, isn't it? So great session. Love the practical suggestions that Jennifer. Thank you for brilliant session. Thank you for informative. Can a baby's taste or any other sense be compromised if they are weaned at 4 months?
don't think it would maybe compromise their sense of taste. I am not a feeding practitioner, but I think it is more around not being ready for swallowing, not being ready for solids at 4 months, rather than it maybe compromising their sense of taste. I don't know, depending on where you are. So I know in the UK that the recommendation is 6 months for weaning. And normally I would say if that's what a parent is looking to do, depending on the reasons why, to be having a conversation with GP, paediatrician, whoever it is, as to the reasons for wanting to do that. Because I don't necessarily think it would have any impact on their sense of taste as such, but there could be other implications more around swallow and feeding, really. So I think it'd be more the medical.
Yeah, that would be a good question for Lucy for a starting solid course. If you want to attend, she would be able to answer that. Because there are certain circumstances when children are advised to be weaned a bit earlier than 6 months. But yeah, it's very it's an interesting question, actually. Great session. Wondering, are there any sensory input reactions that could provide early indication of autism? So if a baby was having a very, very extreme reaction to sensory input, it could, I suppose, show some indicators. Normally, nobody would be looking to say that behaviour in a child under 2 was maybe indicating that, because children do develop at different rates and have different reactions to sensory input, and remembering that the senses and sensory integration is still developing very early on. But things like very extreme reactions to noise or touch, not being able to tolerate clothing, or for older babies, if they were seeking a very, very high level of movement, could be potential indicators. The only thing to say is behaviour is also communication in this age group, so it's not necessarily indicating autism. It could indicate other things that were going on: pain, frustration, discomfort. So if a baby was showing particularly extreme reactions to sensory input, I would say contact the GP, the paediatrician. You could contact your local occupational therapy service to see if they would provide any advice. Normally in the service that I am in, for children under 2, we would send out some sensory information, really, and some sensory activities to try. And it's definitely one to monitor if a child is showing very extreme reactions, they're very avoidant, or they're seeking a lot. But just be aware, it might indicate something else. It could indicate another medical condition or some bit of pain. But it would definitely be one to keep an eye on and start to have maybe those earlier discussions with doctors and OTs. Yeah, that's great. And maybe you can also explain to us about your kind of work. What do you do when people need to look for occupational therapists? What kind of things you do? So the initial thing in my NHS role, the initial thing is for parents to actually do a course. So we've run sensory training courses. A lot of that's gone online or video or written format since COVID, actually. And so we want parents to understand what sensory processing is, because that is the beginning of being able to address any sensory processing difficulties. If we don't understand what is behind the behaviours we're seeing, it can be very hard for parents, caregivers, teachers to understand why we may be asking them to put more sensory activities in place. And then in terms of assessment, so if a referral came through to us with concerns around sensory processing, we'd go out and do an assessment through observation and play-based assessments, really, to see, is a child seeking a very high level of sensory input and they're not looking for enough sensory input, or they're having extreme reactions to it. And then we would look to put sensory activities or recommendations or considerations in place in all environments, so home and school or nursery, to meet their sensory needs, whatever they are. So a child that's seeking a lot, we'd be looking to put more sensory input through the day, whereas a child that's maybe sensory
avoidant or very sensitive to input, we'd be looking at how we can support them to be more comfortable within their environment and that type of input. So that's from a sensory side anyway. I work a lot then with children with functional skills, fine motor difficulties, handwriting, dressing, children with physical disabilities too. So we actually cover quite a big area there.
Great. Thank you so much. We're going to have another expert seminar with you. Is it in 2 weeks' time? Saturday, 2 weeks' time on Saturday, the same time, guys. So if you haven't signed up, look, the invite should be in your email. We're going to be covering motor skills. Okay, Anna, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. You take care, and hopefully we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you for watching our video. For more London School of Childcare Studies content, see our social media or visit our website childcarestudies.co.uk.